Welcome everybody to tonight's presentation. I'm going to start with a brief history of ICS IAP forms, the 200 series forms, and then Barry's going to give you a real-time experience with those forms and go through them in detail. My part of the presentation is very brief. So second slide, please.
It's up.
Okay, during the 1980 wildfire season, Vice President Mondale witnessed FireScope's Incident Command System and Multi-Agency Coordinating System, or MACS, in process, in action. And after he got back to Washington, D.C., Vice President Mondale shared his experience with 5 Army colonels, and they couldn't believe that it was the process and a series of forms that allotted for such remarkable success rather than someone in charge. And at the bottom of this slide, I have a really great resource that gives you lots of wonderful detail about how ICS began. I'm going to pick out a few points tonight and share them with you as they relate to our ICS 200 series forms. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So what were the progenitors of ICS and ICS forms? Next slide, please.
Okay.
The first was called the Large Fire Organization, or LFO. In post-World War II, veterans created the LFO. The LFO was an organization created an incident management system applying command and control experience that they had gained in the military to manage wildland fires. And the system was capable of expanding to incorporate multiple agencies. Next slide, please.
Okay.
But in 1970, the devastating Southern California fire season birthed something called FireScope. The Large Fire Organization, or LFO, in their After Action, or AAR reports, showed that the LFO system lacked a strong central coordinating framework. And they also noticed that there was confusion because people used different terminology, different organizational structures. There were different operational procedures between various response organizations. And they had a real challenge trying to coordinate multiple resources to handle a number of different simultaneous demands. It was really hard to determine who and where the priorities were for those resources. So after reviewing this After Action report, the Congress allotted funds to the United States Forestry Service. And the funds were used in 1973 to establish a research, development, and application program in Riverside, California. And the program had another name, though, called FireScope. And you can see on the slide where the letters came from to form the word FireScope. So the long name is Firefighting Resources of Southern California, Organized for Potential Emergencies. And on this slide, I've given you a link, a live link, that you can actually go onto the FireScope website. And they have a really great video there, not only giving you more of the details of the history, but also talking about how they handle communications at this time, including now data communications. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So this slide shows in more detail the little generation now that started with FireScope being an organization, and that came out of the Large Fire Organization, and that birthed FireScope, And fire scope was divided into 3 parts. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see number 1 says command systems, policies, and operations. Number 2 is command system development. And number 3 is system implementation. So tonight, we're not going to look at all of those. We're going to really focus in on tactical field control operations under part 1, and they call it part C. So on the little diagram, you see the large fire organization and fire scope birth, part 1C, as a part of the ICS, and that was part of the tactical field control operations. And next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, I got to get it up. So forms are part of the ICS tactical field control operations. Contractors were working with FireScope, their technical team, to develop a filing system to keep track of ICS notes, documents, and guides. So this diagram shows you the filing system in a little more detail. First, we had the 100 series, and that was for development documents and notes. And now I want to move your eye over to the 300 and 400 series that was for training documents and ICS guides. And finally, the focus of tonight's presentation is going to be on the 200 series, or the common forms. Now today, the original numbering series of this filing system has expanded. So you may see things like 700s or 800s, etc. But we're only going to focus tonight on the 200 series. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So the ICS Series 200 forms can be used for many things, but they reflect the ICS, or Incident Command System, so they're designed for all risk and all hazards. They become part of the larger event and incident, and they also become part of their, well, just consider them as legal documents. I think that kind of says it all. Next, specific to the ICS series forms used in the Incident Action Plan or its resources, and the use of the IAP, or Incident Action Plan, is evidence-based best practice. And common forms are the ICS 201, or the Incident Briefing, and the ICS 202, Incident Objectives. Both of those we'll cover tonight. Last slide, please. Now, let's find out, how can ICS 200 series forms be useful in this situation? And this is an early picture of Hurricane Ian. So let's check in with South Florida Section Manager and Aries Leader, Barry, KB1PA. Barry, would you share with us how you use the ICS Series 200 forms to create an incident briefing in ICS 201 and an ongoing IAP ICS 202 as a dynamic response to this incident? Thank you, Barry.
I sure can. Dan, you can go ahead and lower your screen. All right, so let me bring this up. So Diana already went over some of the things. So what is the purpose of both an IAP and a SITREP? First, I don't like acronyms that much. So IAP is Incident Action Report. SITREP is a situational report. It's easy to say IAP and SITREP, but those are what they stand for. IAP is Incident Action Report, and SITREP is Situation Report. What do these forms do? As was discussed, it helps focus the group and get SMART goals and objectives. Again, SMART is another acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, and it gives the group a purpose to the efforts. For example, radio responses typically and historically have been local. They differ from city to city, county to county, state to state, and within ARRL, section to section. While our responses have been effective, the reporting has been haphazard at best. All of the agent ARES partners have gotten better at planning responses and setting objectives to incidents. Having an ARES radio-focused IAP in SITREP shows our partners that we are not just present to play radio, and we're very serious at being professional as providing radio operators as part of the incident. Okay, an IAP is a more detailed version of a SITREP. The SITREP is basically summarized in the ICS 209 version of the forms. And as Diane has shown, the 200 series of the ICS, the Incident Command System, are used for making an IAP. When I first visualized doing an IAP for the impending storm, I was thinking of what order would I put the report in, because I hadn't really had that much experience in doing an IAP. Then I looked at the 200 series and realized, wow, the people that made this filing system were really good. The 200 series made it easy. A 201 is page 1 of an IAP. A 202 is page 2 of an IAP. And there are potentially 33 pages, ICS 201 to ICS 233, that could be used in an all-encompassing IAP, including the ICS 200, which is the cover sheet for an IAP. A third of the forms in the IAP are very specific and not commonly used, and when I go through my IAP that I wrote, I'll show some of these just to show you how they all fit in together. So as part of an IAP, the ICS 209 is a SITREP. The SITREP is something that's issued more commonly than an IAP. Usually a SITREP is issued daily, okay?
Barry,
it's the situation.
Do you think you're sharing your screen?
No, I'm just reading a screen. I will be sharing my screen pretty soon. Okay, so what should be in a SITREP? It's the situation to date, what's happened before, up to this date. It's a brief summary of the startup details, the date, the place, the time, and who. It's also included in the initial IAP. It's a summary of the overall situation to date. It ensures old information is deleted and new information is added as needed to the response. It shows actions to date, what has been done. It's a brief reporting of actions completed to date. And usually a table format is used for repeat actions and progressive totals, or a similar action, similarly, destructions of statistics, numbers of properties visited, etc. Actions to be completed, what needs to be done. A brief reporting of a schedule of planned actions, typically for the period covered by the SITREP. As mentioned above, a table may be used when the operation expects to be by the next SITREP, issues that need to be resolved, a brief description of issues that are known and reasonably expected to arise before the next SITREP is issued. In other words, a shortage of a given resource, a significant issue, and acknowledgments of significant achievements, failures, etc., can be usually given in the SITREP. So let me go ahead and share my screen and see if I can't do that here. Share. I'm not sure if it's going to let me do this. It's not letting me do it. Hold on, let's see. I need to set Zoom to allow. I have co-host privileges. Let me see. Share screen. Accessibility, screen recording, okay. Unlock it. For some reason, it wasn't letting me share the screen. I'm not going to, wants me to quit. I'm not going to quit. Let's see now. Share screen. Here we go. Share. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, this is the ICS 200. This was the cover page that I put together for the tri-section Aries IAP action plan for Hurricane Ian. And it basically says the 3 Florida sections have agreed to work together as one group. So when we have potential communications disruptions, we ought to serve the public. We're acting as one group instead of 3 separate groups. And the state only needs to deal with one group when they're planning out their overall emergency response, not just the communications part. Okay, and our non-governmental organizations, all like the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, etc., like to see these kinds of plans because they also make up IAPs for their individual responses. So this is the page ICS 201. It's the map of the incident, and this is a generalized map of Florida that I got from the Northern Florida section. You see the 3 sections, the West Central and the Southern Florida section, and it gives a situation report and a safety briefing very briefly in part 5 that says we're making plans to respond to requests for our partner agencies to assist with providing communications prior to, during, and in the recovery phase of the response to Hurricane Ian. We're currently in the recovery phase right now. We're also preparing to provide situational awareness on a local level as requested, and we did that very closely with working with the National Weather Service and Skywarn. The incident briefing ICS 201, this is page 1A because there's more than one part of this. Basically, it gives the objectives and will function under the incident command system. In the tri-section, Aries ESF2 liaison will coordinate with the state and determine where requests for amateur radio operators deployed will be needed. We'll be using the proper ICS forms to log all radio activity, provide proper net etiquette, and when checked into the various nets that we started up, and we'll be able to handle written messages according to the defined procedures for message handling. And we were supposed to review organizational plans, procedures, and support documents. And our objectives will be SMART. Again, I mentioned that before: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And this was some of the actions that we had already done. We were monitoring the weather forecasts and reviewing for possible activation. All 3 sections went to level 1 activation 24 hours before it made landfall, so we were all staffed and ready. We were checking supplies and radios and keeping ECs, PIOs, and section staff all aware of developing situations so they would be able to respond accordingly. And here is the organizational chart with the tri-section areas, and we had stuff underneath the tri-sectional areas, but we reported to the state ComU, the comm leader, who was part of the logistics section in the state EC, and this is how we functioned. And of course, each county had their own chart where they responded to the ComLs and the ComTs and everything in the state, in the county EOCs. So this is how Aries integrated in with the ICS. And this is a page 3 or page 1C of the incident briefing, where we basically went through our resources summary and the different meetings that we had held up to the point where I had made this, and there was some more added after it. And page 4, this is page 2 of the incident objectives, and we've said that we were ability to communicate resources without traditional methods in case the phones and the cell phones and the repeaters and stuff went down. And we had to be ready to be able to communicate with these non-traditional methods, and the ability to communicate with state and other agencies using only amateur radio, and be able to send structured messages by one or more techniques. And state preferred WinLink, so we had some WinLink setups that we were able to connect directly with the state EOC to send messages. And we needed to correctly use ICS forms for official messages. We had to provide health and welfare messages to the public, and we actually handled quite a few of these because out-of-state people were trying to contact their relatives in the state, and they were having some trouble during the storm. The ability to gather and report situational utility reports for both the agencies and individuals. We had to work with interoperability and with multiple agencies, and to be able to use and log forms to log all activities performed using ICS forms. And we were things, the point of emphasis was all three sections to work together as a single team and be aware of safety at all times, report situational awareness and needs requests to the proper authorities using the correct forms, using the proper procedures. And this is something that we filled out just to show the three section leaders for the ham radio response for the incident commanders for their sections. And we didn't bother to fill out the rest of it because at the time we weren't sure who was going to be activated and who wasn't. But this is the IAP ICS 203, page 3. ICS page 4 is the assignment list. And at the time we didn't have too many assignments ready, but this is what you would fill out to for the operational period of the ICS. You would set a date and a time that this particular ICS operational period, IAP, was in force, and when it ended, which branch and division and group, etc. And you'd fill out work assignments and communications and radio functions and how it was done. This is a 205. This is a very brief 205. Each county had their own 205s, and each section emergency coordinator had all of the county 205s for the different areas in their county to be able to use, so they were able to assign resources. This was the tri-section nets that we had assigned on HF and on SARNet, and SARNet is a thing of 35 repeaters that links just about 95% of the entire state on UHF, and it was very valuable for technicians to be able to use during the response, to be able to communicate with their different groups and to the state. The state actually had someone in the ESF2 desk with an HF radio, and there was also someone with a UHF radio that was on SARNet almost 24 hours for the first 48 hours of the response. And this is ICS 205A, it's 5A of the IAP, and it basically lists all the assigned positions the hams would have, their names, and their methods of contact, where they are, what their tactical call signs are, and stuff like that. And this is the medical plan for ICS 206. This is if a group was responding to a hospital, you want to collect the names of the medical aid stations, how the transportation, which ambulance services were in their location, what their contacts or abilities, whether there were paramedics available, what level of service they have, what the hospital names are and the different means to contact them, and if there are any special emergency procedures that anyone would need to be done. Again, this is the organizational chart. It's IAP page 7, it's ICS 207. It's the same thing that was listed on the other page, except this is a bigger one, and my lines didn't connect on this one. Okay, this is the safety message, ICS 208. And again, we were letting people know that standard fire and safety regulations relevant to the local jurisdictions were supposed to be followed, and safety takes priority over anything else. Don't cross flooded roads. Be cautious driving when roads are covered in standing water or filled with debris. And if anyone has seen any of the news reports, the news films, they actually had to do water rescues from some nurses and stuff that drove through flooded roads and got their cars stuck. So it's very dangerous to do that. Want the people to maintain the situational awareness at all times. Look up, look down, and look around to see if you see any hazards around you. Take precautions to avoid electrocution when handling powered equipment or when handling power cables or extension cables. Wear protective glasses and protective clothing when working with antennas, antenna poles, or any other sharp or pointed objects, just for your own safety. Make sure all equipment is properly grounded. Again, follow RF safety guidelines for yourself and for people that aren't aware of RF exposure. Have awareness of overhead hazards, power poles, electrical wires. Don't erect antennas under power lines. Always stay at antenna height away from power lines in case they fall down. And when you're working on antennas, work in pairs. This is all basically common sense stuff. Have a fire extinguisher at each generator. Know how to use it. It doesn't do any good to have a fire extinguisher if you don't know how to use it. Store fuel away from the generator or other sources of heat and sparks. Wear a hard hat and work is being done above your head. Wash or sanitize your hands. Field sanitation prevents disease. Before touching your face, blowing your nose, coughing, or sneezing. Before eating and after eating. And have adequate drinking water and stay hydrated. Very important this time of year in Florida. Know if you have to dial 911 to get emergency medical care, or notify net control of your net if you need to get EMS. And weapons in Florida are not permitted by non-government agency personnel in any governmental facilities, and weapons aren't part of this response. This is a safety control plan if you were in a specific place. This wasn't filled out because it was just in there to show the people that are going to the different places that they should fill this out so they could have it as part of their legal plans. And this is the second part of this, where you would include a site map of where you are and entry objectives and any safe work practices and emergency procedures and the safety briefing that you would need to do. This is also an important part. This is essentially the SITREP, the ICS 209. And this is the initial one, and it was the tri-section area managers and the section emergency coordinators that were the commanders, and it was part of the ARL field organization. And basically, you go through this one by one and answer all of the questions, and this way you have a summary of your incident. This is page 2 of the summary of 4. It shows you how many fatalities and all these other things that you need to try to gather data on, responder status, life safety threats, how many projected incidents you've seen, and what strategic objectives you set for your specific incident. On page 3 of this form, which is, again, like I said, it's a SITREP, what's happened in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, and what's anticipated after 72 hours, what critical resources are needed or deployed, what strategic discussions you have about critical resources and incident action plans, etc., and what you're planning for the next operational period. These are usually done for 24 hours. And this is the summary, again, of everything from page 3. The agency and the different resources expended, the total personnel that were deployed or used, and this all gets summarized up. The general message form, which is we're all familiar with, the forms from now on are usually not numbered, but this is obviously approximately page 13 of the IAP, and this is basically a regular old message form, and these have been modified, like we were discussing before, to fit individual agencies, but the basic ICS 213 is still the basic ICS 213, and it's used to send formal written messages from a specific person to a specific person. HAMs generally don't initiate an ICS 213. It has to come from someone that's in charge of whatever agency that we're at, or whatever shelter that you're at, or wherever EOC that you're at. And then we just send it out to the next group. And then if you get a reply, you fill in the reply here. And it's helpful to have an incident name, and it's helpful to assign consecutive numbers to these. It makes tracking the messages easier. And this is a very specific ICS 213. It's the ICS 13RR, a resource request, in case you ever have to request things. For example, if you're in a hospital and you need to order medications, and each of these items have federal numbers next to them, so you don't have to know the exact medical names, which can be very complicated. The spelling can be really hard, but the federal item numbers and the description that's in a booklet that you can get from FEMA is very specific to specific things, and it's a whole lot easier to write out a 6-digit number than it is sometimes to spell some of the medications and some of the other things. This could also be used for requesting antennas. It can be also requested for radios. It could be used for getting water, cots, and stuff like that. This is what you would fill out. And again, it's who it's requested by. It usually has to go through logistics and approved by logistics. And then logistics forwards it around to finance. And finance is the people that finally sign off on that so it can be sent out and the particular items ordered. This is another important thing that hams should be using in an activity. This is the activity log. Everything that you do as a radio operator should be logged here. Your name, your ICS position, like radio operator, what agency you're from, and any activities that you perform as a radio operator, like messages sent, messages received, stuff observed that you have to put down. This is actually a legal log of what you did, and it's very important to get this filled out, and then you have to sign it if you off shelf, when you go off your shift, and acknowledge that everything in this is right. And then you would start another activity log, and there's another page to this if you need to fill it out, because usually these can get very long, and you can make copies of these and stuff like that. And again, these are very important for the radio operators to fill out. This next one is an ICS 215. It's an operational planning worksheet. It helps plan out the operation. It's by work assignments, specific instructions, what resources, whether you require them, have the resource, or need the resource, the periods used, special equipment, position locations, and required arrival time if it's coming. And it's total resources required, total you have on hand, and total needed to order. This helps the leadership a lot. The radio operators can fill this out with specific radio equipment and specific radio requirements. And this goes and gets part of the big IAP that usually the served agency prepares. But this helps them, and they're aware that we know what we need and we know what we can order, and then they can put it as part of their big ICS. And this is an incident action safety plan analysis, which is usually done after the incident, but it basically gives what incident happened, what the hazard was, and what the mitigation was, if there was a safety violation during the incident, and it's a way to keep track of that. And this is a communications availability worksheet. It's an ICS 217, and again, it puts the channel configuration of your radio, the channel name, whether it's a trunk radio system or a talk group, who is eligible to use it, and these were the frequencies that we had for HF and the multiple frequencies of SARNet. So we put that on here, and we put the remarks when we used the specific frequencies. We used 80 meters in the morning and evenings, and in the afternoons we used 40 meters. And of course, SARNet was used 24 hours a day, and it was all linked. The sad thing about this is we had some interference with SARNet, and of the 35 or so repeaters, they had to shut down at least 10 of them during the response due to interference, but it didn't hurt us that much. This is one that we don't normally fill out. It's a support vehicle or equipment inventory if we were ever asked to be able to drive a communications van or a communications vehicle that didn't belong to us. For example, the Red Cross has ERVs, emergency response vehicles, that we could have possibly driven during the incident, and it gives you an inventory of what's on the vehicle. But I included that just in case we needed it. And then at the end, remember, we were mobilized, we responded to a specific place. When we are relieved, we demobilize. We have to fill out this ICS 221, which is a demobilization checkout. And it tells you which unit you were with. We would most likely be checking communications unit. You would put the remarks of where you were, your name and signature, that you're being demobilized, and then any travel information that you might need for reimbursement. And if you're going to be reassignment, you can say yes or you can say no, and reassignment to which incident and which location, and its incident number. And then at the end, the person that fills it out puts the name, position title, and signature and date. And all of this, a daily meeting schedule form, ICS 230, which allows people to prepare ahead of time. For example, a unit command staff meeting, a commander general staff meeting, a tactical meeting, a planning meeting, or operational briefing. Putting the stuff down in paper makes it happen, and this way you can't forget about it. And finally, this is the incident open action tracker. If there's something that happens, you put it on here and you track it. It makes it easier to track incidents. For example, point of contact, there was a point of contact for the incident briefed, when did it start, the status of it is, the target date it started, and the actual date it started. This way you can track a specific incident that you're working on as a radio operator. And that's the ICS that I put together for my section. And fortunately, we used it mostly in the west coast of Florida. And that's all I have for this. Does anybody have any questions? And I will stop the share for both Diana and B. There's got to be some questions.
Well, yeah, Victor's got his hand up. Go ahead, Victor.
Okay, go ahead, Victor. You're muted.
Thank you. Had to find the key. I outlined at the beginning, before the program, how my organization, ACS, is just starting to get its feet under the ground. So this is a great informative presentation. Some of those early forms, 201, 202, are the management forms where every operator is supposed to be completing one of those. And to go along with that, we are anticipating standing up 6 fire stations and hopefully some sort of simplex network. That's got to be worked out yet. But is it every operator, or do we just need a situation report at each station as we change it every 12, 24 hours, shift change, that sort of thing? Go ahead.
Yes, each station, each shelter, or each individual incident, each EOC should do a daily sit rep. The IAP is done beforehand by the leadership and it sets the overall goals, but the sit reps are specific to the individual places. This way it's focused more on, for example, shelter will have a different kind of a sit rep than an emergency operations center. And the HAMs and the emergency operations center's sit rep would be part of the whole emergency operations center's plan. Just like if you're handling in a fire station, the fire station will probably have its own incident action plan to focus that specific fire station in their role. And the HAMs and the communicators will contribute to the sit rep for that specific place. And then they all gather together and become part of the master paperwork for the incident. This way, everything is focused, narrowly focused into the goals and objectives and stuff like that. And there was some stuff in the chat that I didn't see. Why isn't the chat coming up? Hold on. View, show chat.
Well, while you look, Barry, I saw one thing in here that I wanted to say. Oliver mentioned to everyone that the 217 is used to make up the 205, and that's correct. And I just want to say there can be a lot of 217s floating out there, and it's always good to check in for a lot of states with the state SWIC. One of the funniest things, I guess, that happened was out here was 2 ARES groups, one here in Douglas County and one over in Sacramento, California, were doing exercises at the same time, and they did not check with each other's 217s, and they actually interfered with each other's exercises. So we are so close to California here, Sacramento, so it's important to check even with the other ARES teams before doing exercises. But again, be aware of what's in your state, 217s, as well as the TIC-P, and your resource person is your state SWIC.
And Barry,
Yes. And yes, Dan, you're correct. The 209, the sit rep, is a private document that's usually not released to the public because it has sensitive contact information in there. So that's why the sit rep is basically organization focused. It's not usually given out to the general public because that could be very dangerous. And yes, a 205 is a short list of all of the specific frequencies that are available to be used in a disaster. Usually they're not all used in a disaster. So the 205s are focused in on the specific disaster and what's used in the specific disaster. I will put in a footnote about the public-private in my planning.
Okay, and to
And
go,
yes, the hams submit to the planning sheet, and they will include that in their generalized bid plan.
and so generally too, if there's an incident in an IAP, a lot of times you'll see there's a JIC, and that's through the incident command. And they will set up a place where all the news reporters or sometimes there's other people from general public organizations that come and they disseminate the information so the public does not see the IAP.
Yes, we set up here. We had a JIC, and the PIOs man that, and usually the media are not allowed into shelters. They're not allowed into sensitive areas like EOCs. They're all told to go to a JIC where they can get briefed by PIOs and PICs and stuff like that. That makes it a lot easier because news reporters are very, very persistent, and they will try all kinds of methods to get into a shelter or into an EOC to get a breaking story or to get some kind of sensitive information that they can use as a scoop and stuff like that. And yes, all of these forms are generic. They can be used as boilerplate across almost any incident that happens, not just a hurricane. This can be used as a parade. It can be used as any public service event. We need to get used to doing these for public service events and not just for big public events. And it will help us all get trained in using the paperwork. And I'm looking at
Okay, we got a couple hands up here. Tom, you want to take it?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reinforce what Barry just said. Reporters can get more than pushy, downright obnoxious in trying to get what they want, whether you're supposed to give it to them or not. So you have to be mentally prepared for that, and especially not let them bait you with various tricks they have, because if they can't get what they want, they'll be happy with a picture of you sputtering. And to avoid that, you just have to remain calm and tell them, no, you're leaving now, or I will summon law enforcement. But you say it calmly, quietly, not, you don't yell, you don't look like you're freaking out. And it's totally effective to say you're leaving now. I've never had it fail in 5 different times we've had to use it. You're leaving now or I'll summon law enforcement. Does it. They just turn around and leave. They didn't get what they wanted, and that's fine. And one thing video reporters will never do is they will never broadcast curse words. So if you get totally and completely tired of them having that thing in your face and you're ready to take the consequences from your boss, a continuous string of curse words will get them to leave because you make the video useless to them. They can't use it because nobody's going to want video that has an undertone on it continuously because you were cussing them out.
Yep.
But that's a last resort, an absolute last resort, because you've lost.
Great point. Great point. Yes. Oliver pointed out that the ICS 201 training course, the IS-201, and as part of that course, there is a downloadable booklet that includes blanks of all of these forms that you can use to make an IAP and a SITREP for you to download yourself and see.
Okay, Ian?
Oh,
Yeah, just as a supplementary to the comment about speaking with reporters, and this comes with scars on my back, particularly if there's a photographer or a videographer present. Do turn around and look at what's behind you, because they will set you up if you don't stay aware of it. You know, your lips may be moving, but the context behind you suggests otherwise. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. How about you, Dan? You want to take it?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Diana for that trip down memory lane. I went across and Doug, I don't know if this is going to work, this out of the bookcase over there. It's a single book about 5/8 of an inch thick. It's the I-220 and I-120 courses, which is basically all that was available in Alaska in 1985. This was published in 1983, back when NIMS was NIIMS, and it meant something else than the National Incident Management System. I'd have to look through this to find out what the acronym was for back then. So that was a great trip down memory lane, and I learned a lot from it. So thank you.
You're welcome, Dan.
And like I said, this helps the groups, the radio groups, get focused on their jobs. And when we can show these to our agencies that we're working with, they will appreciate the fact that, yes, we know what we're doing, and we're not here just to play radio. During a couple of the responses years ago, I was accused of just being around to play radio, and that I really didn't want to help the whole the group that was there. I was there to play radio, and that wasn't why I was there. If I had this to show them and here, this is how we are integrating with our agency to help you do your job, and it's spelled out in black and white, they'll respect you a whole lot more.
And I want to.
It works with Aries, it works with Aries, it works with OXCOM, it works with ACS, it works with any of the radio groups. And the ComLs and the ComTs and the ComUs will appreciate it.
And I want to go along with what Barry's saying and also encourage you all and in your groups to work on the IAPs together. That way everybody also gets used to let me just back up a minute. Usually an IAP is not written all by one person. It's written by a group of people working together, turning in different pieces. So those people have different titles in the incident command system. So what working on the group was a group together will not only give you more ideas, but it will also give people an opportunity to practice. Like Barry just said, we're there to do more than just operate on radios. We really want to be part of that response system and practice, practice, practice. We don't always in our daily lives get used to being in the mind of our people who are working in emergency management. So when we do these together, we not only build our groups, relationships, and team together to be stronger, but we also gain the experience that we're going to need to pull out at a moment's notice that maybe isn't a part of our everyday 9-to-5 job. So I encourage more teamwork, and you'll see this if you go to take the 300 and 400 courses in person. You're working together with a team, and I know that FEMA has encouraged that kind of mindset now. So I encourage all of you to give it a try.
And most of the VOADs use it. I know the Red Cross does IAPs and sit reps. Beforehand, they have a meeting, and they as a group together, they fill out an IAP, because again, like you said, it's done by individuals with specific responsibilities. For this one, the 3 section managers collaborated. This wasn't just my individual work. 3 section managers got together and we collaborated on this, and because we were being very specific to the radio stuff. But in a general place, the counties do this. Their planning groups do this beforehand and during an incident every day. They sit down and they write these. And if we show that we are part of their team, they will invite us to these meetings and allow us to participate. And again, it will give us more of an impression that we're there to be professionals and to help them and to not just play radio. And yes, this is the forms, the 200 series forms can be very complicated, and it's a lot of pages. But with the right individuals, it takes less than an hour to fill them out. And the more you practice, the better you get. And like I said, this isn't just for big responses. Like I said, if you're doing a field day, you should do an IAP and the situational report every day for field day. You should do it for parades. You should do it for anything that any ham radio group gets together to provide communications, because it's good practice and it's good standards to show our groups that we're working with what we can do.
Okay, I don't see any more hands. Barry's online. Do you see the chat, Barry?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I won't worry about that.
Yes, some very good comments in the chat. And yes, ComLs and ComTs fill out the 205, but we can contribute to what we're doing with the, because a lot of times we'll have a ComL or a ComT assigned to us, and they don't know what our specific radio frequencies are. They can draw in it from the master list, but we can tell them how specifically the repeaters, what Winley channels we're using and stuff like that they might not be familiar with. And then they will put it on their 205 and it will become official. And I guess there's a couple of more hands up. So
Why are there? Okay, Victor's got his hand up again. Go ahead, Victor.
Two things. One, I've seen some comments in chat asking you to clarify several of the acronyms. Don't think it was CIC, but there was one of those in there. The other the question out of me though is debriefing, or not debriefing, but the 223. One thing that's been mentioned at a couple of organizations is the idea that we'll do a roll call on one of these fifth Saturdays, probably about 9:30. And then at 12 o'clock, when the exercise winds down, there's nobody left to check out. They've all just walked away from the radios without saying 73 or leaving the situation, whatever, standing down. Any guidelines on how to try to keep people focused in for the 2 hours, or at least to check out? Thank you.
for legal purposes, they have to check out. They should check in and they should check out, and it should be recorded somewhere. This way, if something happens somewhere on their way home, they might not be covered if they don't check out because they're not supposed to be there. If they check out, a lot of times the insurance will cover them going to and from. So if they don't check out, they don't know where they are, and they might not be covered. It's out by insurance companies. And I'm looking to see where the acronyms are here, so I can. I'm not sure what some of these acronyms are.
Well,
I'm not sure.
Which ones are there? Is it ICC, the Incident Command Center, or what?
No, it's what's a CRU?
See,
Communications Reserve Unit.
Okay.
Okay.
And what's a CMT, Dan?
It's actually a ComT. Look at the message below.
Okay.
I dropped the O.
Okay, I see it now.
CMT is a certified medical technician. So
yeah. A GIC is a Joint Information Center, or PIO is a Public Information Officer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I spelled all those out. So in my thing. So
what jurisdiction is a certified medical technician, not an EMT, because that's what they use over here on the left coast. EMTs and medics.
Every state is different.
Okay, there's a national registry of.
There's a national registry for. They can have let's see, emergency medical response technician, and then there's an EMT, and then there's a paramedic. And so those are the usual three, and they all have different descriptions. And they all are certified within their states. And yes, there is a national certification on top of that you can gain. And
the CMT is totally different. They're usually phlebotomists.
Well,
or they give out medication.
Or the medical technician. Yeah, it all varies from state to state, but there is a national organization, at least one, that do those national exams for some of those positions.
It's called the NREMP, the National Registry for EMTs, but they issue paramedic, EMT, EMTA,
Yeah.
and I don't think they issue the EMR, which are the locally certified emergency medical responders, first responders.
Right,
Okay.
but those, the Red Cross, for example, has that class and it's a national class. So it's all mixed up. It's
Yeah. So this discussion about IAPs is overwhelming. I know that because I've been overwhelmed by it several times.
But if you're with a group, Dan, and everybody has an assignment, it's a lot easier. Or if you follow the planning P, it's called.
Well, that's right. That's out of the ICS 300.
That's
My definition of the best IAPs are those that say nothing that is not essential for the mission and everything that is.
That's
and it took
correct.
a while to get to that. And nobody writes a whole, except maybe Oliver, nobody writes a whole IAP. And we will be doing that in practice just so that when we deal with our part in a real incident, we're familiar with what the rest of the IAP is.
That's why we went over this.
Yeah, exactly. And I commend what you showed because there was no excess verbiage. That everyone I write gets briefer and better.
Mm-hmm. The more you practice, the better you get.
I'll lower my hand now.
Well, and ideally, the IAP is a wonderful briefing if you're coming into an incident. You may only get the shorter briefing, the 201, but if you can lay your eyes on a 202, that can be really helpful.
I think traditionally there's a minimum of one IAP for every 8 people, and you know where that number comes from.
Yep, that's right. Supposedly.
Okay, Skip's been patiently waiting out there. So Skip, you want to come on?
Hi, thanks for recognizing me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, what's your call sign?
Oh, I'm W9REL.
Okay.
A quick hi to my friend Steve Waterman. I see he's checked in. He's probably going to cringe when I bring this topic up because I've discussed it with him before. Some of the ICS forms, like the 201, 202, and the ICS 213, which is what initially piqued my interest in this, some of these forms should have fields for latitude and longitude. And while that may seem superfluous to some people, in the WinLink system, there's a I don't want to say complex, but a very easy to use and very helpful mapping feature. But if the form does not have a latitude and longitude on it, then the mapping feature has no way to know where that form is coming from. But if it is on there, then a map can be generated to show where all these forms are coming from specifically. And in an EOC environment, for instance, being able to put such a map up on the screens would be very, very helpful. So with that, I rest my case.
Okay.
One of these forms had a place for latitude and longitude, and I don't remember which one it was.
Well, maybe Larry knows. Larry, you got your hand up.
211's for aviation.
Okay.
Hey, first of all, the 213 form, that is just a basic guideline. If you take a look and do a deep dive in all the forms that are out there, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different ones where they've added fields for their own specific purposes. As far as adding a latitude and longitude on every form, you may be defeating the purpose by putting in too much data and confusing the people who are receiving it. I think it's a good idea if it's required and really needed. Do you really have to know that the guy is at a latitude and longitude, which is a EOC to start with? Remember, you're just passing the message. And the message, if the message comes to you without the information, you don't give them the information. Because remember, we're the communicators. We're spreading the word that, hey, little Johnny fell down and broke his big toe and his hangnail's leaning out. If that's the message you get, that's the one you send. You don't need a latitude, you don't need a longitude. If you do, then you will put it into the originator will put it into the form. I mean, you can get really complicated on some of these forms. And the idea is keep it simple, stupid.
But I do
I think that-
understand where Skip is coming from, because they can generate a lot of geo information by getting latitude and longitude on the forms, and they can map specific things on software that he's done to show a graphical description of where people are and what's happening.
Yeah, but
So
if
I do
you're
understand. If you
doing
need it, you put it in.
right, well, if you're doing the if you look at your forms, you have an intelligence form in the ICS thing, which is basically has that on there. It doesn't necessarily have the 213. And if you go back and you look at all the forms that everybody uses, they're usually, you start loading stuff onto a certain specific form, you're going to get a lot of confusion. That's why the 213 is what it is. I did a deep dive in this about, oh, good God, 15 years ago. And you ought to see some of the beautiful 213 forms that are out there. And when you look at them, it gets very, very confusing. I mean, they have a lot of good ideas and stuff, but there are forms available for when you're doing assessments. And that'll give you latitude, longitude. And that's a completely different form. It gives you a heck of a lot more information that you really need than what you can remember to put on a 213.
I just put two documents into the chat. One of them is the ICS forms booklet, and the second one is an IAP help document put out by FEMA for anyone that wants to download those. There's two more hands up, Dan.
Well, okay. Let's take Tom. I think Tom was just there.
We ran into a situation, it wasn't our doing to put in geographic information, but where one of the support providers insisted they had to have not the Maidenhead, but the national grid square on everything that was requesting a resource to a location. And we as the communicators somehow got stuck with the job, and we're there to do what we were asked to do. So when they asked for that, we did come up with a way to do it. It took us a few minutes, but we did. But I'm with Larry. I don't like that sort of thing at all. I think they should have provided that information on the original form if they needed it. Problem was there was a bunch of locations staffed by a variety of personnel, many of whom were not familiar with the whole concept of a national grid system. No time to train them, so they taxed us with it. And I mean taxed. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any more hands up. I'll be in the chat there. What, wait a minute. There's Dan. He's got his hand up again. Go ahead, Dan.
So the issue of precise geolocation is huge. And I said the 211. The 211 is what the aviation frequency form is. And we, unless we're also pilots, had best not be messing with them or even paying attention to them. There's always going to be an air ground on a 205, at least for the all hazard responses in the west that's burning up.
I did leave some of the forms out, but in the booklet that I sent you has all of the forms that we would ever need to fill out.
But the geolocation happens superbly on all of the GIS products. In other words, every helicopter job, first of all, the IAP describes assignments in terms of branches, divisions, and sections. And the boots on the ground either do or don't have compasses or GPSs, but they don't care for anything. I mean, when you're cutting fire lines, you're doing it where you're told to by the 1-to-7 ratio command staff. But all the GIS products that they're working for, that PIOs have access to and the planning team has access to, have everything. The long lines are on those maps. And then where there are specific identified things like drop points, ICPs, tactical repeaters, they're listed with their lat long in the bottom margin of those GIS created maps. So
And most, yeah, yeah. And most
I
water rescue vehicles have GIS capable locators, so they know exactly where they are. So when they're told to go to a water rescue, they're given the latitude and longitude for the water rescues. So the water rescuers will know the exact house to go to do the water rescue, or the exact place in the field where they're requesting a water rescue.
So now in the flooded areas, are they using landmarks or, traditional place names, or lat long, Barry?
They're using lat long because a lot of the street names have been blown, the street signs have been blown down. So, and a lot of the rescue people aren't familiar with the area because they're coming from out of state. So they're using lat long.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Sorry I interrupted.
That's all right.
Great presentation. You two are doing great. Victor, you got your hand up again.
I do. I would say many years ago, I worked for the Forest Service and we worked on several job sites. I could not tell you that anybody ever told me you're going down Forest Road A, B, C, D. I have no idea where I was. I was just out in the field. What does that mean for lat long? What does that mean for orientation? Something to consider. As long as there's recorded somewhere, I guess the bases are covered and the questions answered, we can get back to it. We're not calling in for an airstrike here or a water drop. We're just, out in the field and saying, I'm up in the valley and I need whatever. Thank you. Have a great week, everybody.
Okay, Larry, you want to go again?
Yeah, one of the things that, I hear all this thing now, we were talking about ICS forms. When you're out in the field and you're getting a movement from point A to point B, you're not usually filling out an ICS form. You're usually going directly dispatch to well, I used to fly with the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, as that's called now. But, we never used lat long in all the years that I did that. We used landmarks, and thing is, now if we were talking about forms. Every time you send a 213 form out, that is a direct message to somebody, you're receiving it and you're sending it. That is not a situation where you are generating the form. If you are generating the form, are you going to use a 213 while you're doing a search and rescue? I wouldn't be doing it. I'd be giving information out and let the poor guy that's receiving it jot it down, because I'm going to be too busy working the scene. So, like I said, we were talking about 213 forms, and our job as communicators are communicators, not navigators.